It was 1967, and Otis Redding was sitting in his dressing room at the Apollo Theater in Harlem when he heard his own song on the radio. Except it didn't sound like his song. The voice was different. The arrangement was different. The entire meaning had been turned inside out. He leaned forward, confused, trying to place what he was hearing. And then it hit him. That's my song. But it's not mine anymore. The voice belonged to Aretha Franklin, and what she had done to respect was something Otis had never imagined possible. She had taken his plea and turned it into a demand. She had taken his vulnerability and weaponized it into power. And in that moment, sitting alone in a dressing room while his own composition played on the radio in a version he barely recognized, Otis Redding had to make a choice. He could be angry. He could be territorial. He could do what most artists do when someone else takes their song and makes it bigger. Or he could do something that would define his character as much as his voice ever did. But to understand that choice, you need to go back, way back, to a dusty town in Georgia where a boy learned that music wasn't just about sound. It was about survival. Otis Ray Redding Jr. was born in 1941 in Dawson, Georgia, in a sharecropper's cabin where the walls were thin and the future looked even thinner. His father picked cotton on land that would never belong to him. His mother cleaned houses for white families who paid her just enough to keep the Redding children from starving. When Otis was 3, the family moved to Macon, Georgia, settling into Tyndall Heights, a public housing project where 6 children shared 2 small rooms, and hope was something you had to manufacture yourself. Otis found his hope in the Veenville Baptist Church choir. Every Sunday, he would stand in that choir and sing gospel with a voice that seemed too big, too raw, too ancient for a child's body. By the time he was 15, his father had fallen sick with tuberculosis, and Otis made a decision that would shape everything that came after. He dropped out of Ballard Hudson High School and went to work. He dug wells. He pumped gas. He roofed houses in the Georgia heat. But every night, no matter how exhausted his body was, Otis sang. Because singing wasn't a hobby, it was the only thing that made the rest of it bearable. By 1962, Otis had caught his break at Stax Records in Memphis, Tennessee. He had driven guitarist Johnny Jenkins to a recording session, and when there was time left over, someone asked if Otis wanted to try something. He sang a ballad he had written called "These Arms of Mine," and Jim Stewart, the owner of Stax, signed him on the spot. Over the next 3 years, Otis became a machine. Hit after hit after hit. Pain in My Heart. Mr. Pitiful. I've Been Loving You Too Long. He was selling out venues across America, but here's the painful part. He was selling out black venues. The Chitlin Circuit. The Apollo Theater in Harlem. Clubs that catered to black audiences. White America, for the most part, had no idea who Otis Redding was, and that burned. Not because Otis was greedy, but because he believed his music could speak to everyone if only they would listen. In 1965, Otis sat down at Stax Studios with Steve Cropper and wrote a song about something deeply personal. It was about coming home after weeks on the road, about walking through the door exhausted, broke down, beaten up by the world. And all he wanted, all he needed, was a little respect from the woman waiting for him. The song was called Respect, and when Otis sang it, you could hear the weariness in his voice. You could hear a man who was tired of fighting, tired of proving himself, tired of being disrespected by an industry that made millions off his talent while treating him like he didn't matter. All I'm asking is for a little respect when you come home, he sang. And it was honest. It was vulnerable. It was a man on his knees asking for something he should not have to beg for. The song became a hit in the black community. It reached number 35 on the Billboard Hot 100, solid, respectable, but not a crossover smash. Just another Otis Redding song that white radio wouldn't touch. But someone was listening. Aretha Franklin heard respect, and something clicked. Aretha was the daughter of the famous Detroit preacher C.L. Franklin. She had been singing gospel since she was a child, and by 1967 she had signed with Atlantic Records and was working with legendary producer Jerry Wexler. Wexler was looking for the song that would break Aretha into the mainstream. And when he played her Otis Redding's Respect, Aretha sat quietly for a long moment. Then she said something that would change music history. "I'm going to flip it." Wexler looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "He's asking for respect," Aretha said. "I'm going to demand it." What Aretha did next was not a cover. It was a reinvention. She kept Otis's melody. She kept the title. But she tore apart the meaning and rebuilt it from a completely different perspective. Where Otis had sung with vulnerability, Aretha sang with power. Where Otis had pleaded, Aretha commanded. And then she added something that Otis had never even thought of: the spelling section. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Find out what it means to me. Those letters, spelled out with such precision, such authority, turned the entire song into a manifesto. This wasn't a woman waiting patiently at home for her man to come back. This was a woman saying, "You want respect? You better give it first. You want to walk through that door and demand something from me? You better come correct." Aretha recorded Respect in February 1967 at Atlantic Studios in New York. The session was electric. Her sisters Carolyn and Irma sang backup. The arrangement was tighter, funkier, more aggressive than anything Otis had done. And when Aretha opened her mouth and sang that first line, everyone in the studio knew this was not just a song, this was a movement. Respect was released in April 1967. Within weeks, it shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Not number 35, #1. It stayed there for 2 weeks. It became the anthem of the civil rights movement. It became the anthem of the women's liberation movement. It became the sound of 1967, the sound of a generation demanding to be seen, to be heard, to be respected. And suddenly, everywhere Otis Redding went, people were asking him the same question. "What do you think about Aretha's version?" The first time someone asked, Otis was backstage at a venue in the South. He had just finished a show, and a journalist shoved a microphone in his face. "Otis, have you heard what Aretha Franklin did to your song?" Otis smiled. It was not a bitter smile. It was not a forced smile. It was genuine. "Yeah, I heard it," he said. "What do you think?" the journalist pressed. Otis laughed. "That girl took my song." The journalist's eyes widened, waiting for the anger, the outrage, but Otis kept smiling. "She took my song," he repeated, "and she made it better." The room went quiet. Nobody expected that. In an industry built on ego, on competition, on protecting your territory, Otis Redding had just done something radical. He had told the truth. "I sing it one way," Otis continued. "She sings it another. Her way works, and I respect that." The journalist stammered. "So you're not upset?" "Upset?" Otis shook his head. "Man, I'm proud. That's my song, and she turned it into something the whole world is singing. How could I be upset about that?" But here's what most people don't know. Otis didn't just say those words for the press. He meant them. Because Otis Redding understood something that many artists never learn. Great songs don't belong to the people who write them. They belong to the people who need them. When Otis performed Respect live after Aretha's version became a hit, he would introduce it with a sly grin. "This next song," he would say, pausing for effect, "is a song that a girl took away from me." The audience would laugh, recognizing the reference. "A good friend of mine," Otis would continue, "her name is Aretha Franklin, and she took my song, but I'm going to sing it anyway." And then he would launch into his version, the original version, the one about a man coming home tired and broken. and the audience would hear both versions in their heads at once. The plea and the demand, the vulnerability and the power. Two sides of the same coin, two truths about respect that could coexist without erasing each other. That was the genius of Otis Redding. He didn't see Aretha's success as his failure. He saw it as proof that the song was bigger than either of them. In June 1967, Otis performed at the Monterey Pop Festival in California, the performance that would introduce him to white mainstream audiences for the first time. During his set, he played Respect, and when he introduced it, he told the crowd of 50,000 people, most of them white, most of them unfamiliar with his music, "This is a song that a girl took away from me, a good friend of mine, Aretha Franklin." The crowd cheered. They knew Aretha's version. That was the one they had heard on the radio. But then Otis sang it his way, and something remarkable happened. The crowd heard the original for the first time and realized what Aretha had done. She had not just covered a song, she had answered it. Otis's version was a question. Aretha's version was the response. Together, they created a conversation about power, gender, exhaustion, and dignity that no single version could have accomplished alone. Behind the scenes, Aretha and Otis respected each other deeply. They had come from the same world, gospel churches in the South, black families fighting to survive in a country that wanted to keep them poor and powerless. They both knew what it meant to pour your soul into music and have the industry try to own it, control it, profit from it while giving you scraps. So when Aretha took Respect and made it her own, she wasn't stealing from Otis. She was building on what he had started, and Otis knew that. He saw it. He honored it. In interviews later, Aretha would speak about Otis with reverence. "He was a great artist," she said. "One of the greatest, and Respect will always be his song too." That generosity ran both ways. Two artists at the top of their game, refusing to let ego destroy what the music had created. But the story of Respect is also the story of something darker. The music industry in the 1960s was built on exploitation. Black artists created the sound. White executives made the money. And even when a black artist like Otis or Aretha broke through, they were paid a fraction of what their white counterparts earned. Otis wrote Respect, but he didn't own the publishing rights. The label did. So when Aretha's version sold millions of copies, Otis saw some royalties as the songwriter, but the real money went to the people who had nothing to do with creating the song. That was the system. That was the deal. And Otis knew it. Every black artist knew it. You could be the biggest star in the world and still not own your own work. That's why Otis's reaction to Aretha's version was so important. In a system designed to pit black artists against each other, to make them fight over crumbs, Otis refused. He chose solidarity. He chose respect. Otis Redding died on December 10, 1967, just 6 months after his triumph at Monterey. His plane crashed into a frozen lake in Wisconsin. He was 26 years old. When the news reached Aretha, she was devastated. She had lost a peer, a friend, a fellow traveler on a road that very few people understood. At Otis's funeral in Macon, Georgia, more than 4,500 people came to pay their respects. And somewhere in that crowd of mourners, you have to believe that Aretha's version of Respect was playing in people's heads. Because by then, it had become more than a song. It had become a symbol of the fight for dignity that Otis had lived and died for. Respect went on to become one of the most important songs in American history. In 2002, the Library of Congress added it to the National Recording Registry. In 2021, it was ranked #1 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Not Otis's version, Aretha's. But here's the beautiful part. That ranking doesn't erase Otis. It honors him. Because without Otis's original, vulnerable, aching plea for respect, Aretha's powerful, defiant demand could never have existed. They needed each other. The song needed both of them. What Otis Redding and Aretha Franklin showed the world is that great art is not a competition. It's a conversation. Otis asked a question with his version. Aretha answered it with hers. And together, they created something that neither could have created alone. A dialogue about power, about gender, about exhaustion, about what it means to be human and demand to be treated like you matter. Otis could have been bitter. He could have fought to reclaim his song. He could have spent the rest of his short life resenting Aretha for making respect hers. Instead, he smiled. He celebrated her. He told the world she made it better. And in doing so, Otis Redding proved that his greatness was not just in his voice, it was in his character. Some artists are remembered for their hits. Others are remembered for their humanity. Otis Redding is remembered for both. The story of Respect is the story of two legends who understood that music is bigger than ego. It's the story of a man who wrote a song about being tired and a woman who turned it into a rallying cry. It's the story of vulnerability meeting power and creating something eternal. And it's the story of why, more than 50 years later, when someone spells out RESPECT, the whole world knows exactly what it means.